Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Talk About Race podcast, Election Edition. I'm Zaria here with my always on point co host to spill the tea, unpack the facts, and throw a little shade on how race and politics collided in the 2024 election.
I'm Layla, and let me tell you, this episode is loaded. We're talking Kamala Harris, a historic trailblazer or queen of playing it safe. Did her campaign challenge America's racial reckoning or sidestep it like the Tamia line dance?
And I'm Diamond, ready to dish out the receipts. So we've got Bonilla Silva's four frames of colorblind racism, Mary Waters' optional ethnicities, and even some jaw-dropping moments from history to keep it juicy. So if you're not ready to question your worldview, maybe skip this one because we are not holding back.
Oh, and let's not forget, we're digging into moments like Valerie Castile's powerful words, the nonsense of the one drop rule, and yes, how the government still wants to tell people what race you are. Buckle up, y'all, it's going to be a ride. Okay, let's start with the critiques. A lot of people felt Harris's campaign didn't do enough to reach lower class voters, especially in policy. Sure, she talked about systemic issues, but where was the deep dive into economic policies that could actually change lives?
Exactly. And there was the overuse of black performers to court the black vote. Don't get me wrong, I love a good Beyonce anthem as much as the next person, hashtag Beehive. But when your campaign feels like Coachella meets pandering, people notice.
Right, it's like we get it, Kamala, you know Lizzo. Now, what's your plan for addressing the wealth gap? For some, it felt performative and alienating, especially for working class voters who wanted substance, not just vibes.
Okay, but hold up. I kind of see why she did that because the black vote has been undervalued for decades, and she was trying to energize people who felt overlooked. So I guess using culture and representation was a way to connect. And yes, it wasn't perfect, but it's not like she's the first politician to use music and celebs to hype up voters.
True, but there's a difference between connecting and, well, giving us the political version of a TikTok trend. People want policy, not just playlist.
Exactly. It's like going to a potluck and bringing napkins when people are hungry. Sure, it's something, but it's not enough.
Fair, but let's not pretend other campaigns didn't have their own missteps. At least she was trying to highlight black joy and culture, which is more than we can say for some politician. Trump.
Speaking of Trump, can we talk about how he couldn't stop bringing up Kamala's race? Every rally, it was like, she's black, just reminding you.
Right. It was like his campaign strategy was just saying black louder and louder as if that was the mic drop. We get it, Don. You notice she's not white. What else you got?
Right. He acted like her race was some kind of secret he was exposing. Did you know she's black? Yes, Donald. And we also know you can't handle it.
Trump wasn't subtle about it. Remember when he kept bringing up her race like it was a bad thing? She's not fully black. Or when did she become black? That man couldn't stop himself.
Right. It's like he had a checklist of racist buzzwords he needs to hit before breakfast. The way he framed her as too black for some and not black enough for others was peak gaslighting.
Yes, her multiracial identity added to the complexity. On one hand, she was celebrated for breaking barriers, and on the other, some people questioned if she was black enough. The double standards were wild.
Exactly. It was a classic double bind. Black voters were like, is she repping us enough? While everyone else was like, why did she talk about race at all?
Meanwhile, Trump was over there throwing gasoline on the fire. His attacks were calculated to alienate voters, bringing up her background to question her legitimacy.
And let's not pretend he didn't know what he was doing. It's the same playbook he used with Obama: stoke racial insecurities, weaponize identity, and distract from real issues.
It's the age old issue of racial gatekeeping. She wasn't just navigating politics, she was navigating everyone's opinion about her identity. And Trump, he leaned into cultural racism hard, framing her as other to stoke fear and division.
That man weaponized her race like it was his campaign slogan. She's black, she's radical, and she's coming for your suburbs. Sir, calm down.
But honestly, y'all, this isn't new. America's always been obsessed with controlling narratives around race. Look at Bacon's rebellion in the 1670s. Back then, enslaved black people in white indentured service were banding together against the elite. The elites panicked and started pushing racial divisions to break that unity.
And it worked. Suddenly, poor white folks were given just enough privilege to feel superior, and black folks got the short end of the stick. Fast forward to today, and the playbook hasn't changed much.
Honestly, the way Harris handled the racial comments, calmly clapping back and moving on, was kind of impressive. I would have sent him a gift basket with a note that said, "Cry harder."
But seriously, this whole thing shows how much racial identity still shapes perceptions in politics. Harris couldn't just run as a politician, she had to constantly explain her existence.
Which is exhausting. And it also makes you wonder how much of her messaging was shaped by the need to play defense on her identity rather than play offense on policy.
A lot. And that's what we need to talk about when we discuss representation. It's not just about being in the room, it's about how the room treats you when you're there.
So let's go back to Eduardo Bonilla Silva's four frames of colorblind racism: abstract liberalism, naturalization, cultural racism, and minimization of racism. Think of these as Trump's campaign's handbook.
Abstract liberalism? Oh, he was all about that. Everyone has equal opportunities, he'd say, while arguing that affirmative action is unfair to hardworking Americans. Translation: policies that help minorities are seen as giving them an undeserved edge.
Naturalization was another favorite. Trump loved to frame racial tensions as just the way things are, like when he said, "People naturally stick to their own," as if segregation was some kind of cute instinct and not a structural problem.
In cultural racism, whew, that man blamed bad neighborhoods and failed cultures for disparities. Never mind systemic barriers. He made it sound like minority communities were just doing it to themselves.
And don't forget minimization of racism. Racism? What racism? Trump downplayed it at every turn. If someone brought up discrimination, he'd say, "Stop playing the race card. It's 2024, not 1964."
The wildest part, he pushed all this while claiming to be the least racist person in the room. Spoiler, he wasn't.
So, yeah, Trump used these frames to dodge accountability and shift blame, making systemic racism invisible while stoking division. Classic playbook, but so dangerous.
Exactly. When you sipping on that colorblind Kool-Aid, policies designed to address systemic inequities look like overreactions.
Okay, y'all, but here's the thing. Can you really unity your way out of systemic racism? Spoiler alert, you can't. Now let's get into Mary Waters' optional ethnicities. This is the privilege of treating your ethnicity like a cute accessory. Oh, I'm Irish today because it's St. Patrick's Day. Meanwhile, Black and brown folks don't get that option.
Waters lays it all out. Symbolic ethnicities are confined to white Americans of European origin, she says. Translation: if your ancestors didn't come from Europe, you're stuck with society's rules about race, whether you like it or not.
And we saw this in the elections. Some Hispanic voters leaned into white adjacent identities to align with conservative messages. Others said, nah, we're sticking with communities of color and multiracial identities. Phew, people really don't know what to do with them. It's like their brain short circuit. They could be this amazing bridge for understanding, but instead they're treated like a human version of let's all just hold hands and sing kumbaya.
Right. For multiracial people, it's like pick a side, or worse, they're reduced to can't we all just get along? Like, no, Aunt Carol, it's not that simple. Multiracial people aren't here to solve your racial anxiety.
And let's talk about the government's role. Mary Waters reminds us, quote, the government via the law determines how race is defined. It's wild when you think about it. Like the census changes racial categories as often as people change their Instagram bios. One day it's Negro, the next it's multiracial, and who knows what's next. But those changes aren't just cosmetic, they have real world consequences.
Exactly. Take the one drop rule, for example. It's still haunting us like a bad ex who just won't move on. It's not about biology, it's about power. The government decided one day that one drop of black ancestry made you black, and that definition wasn't about inclusion, it was about exclusion.
Right, because controlling who counts as what race has always been about maintaining power. It's not just about identity, it's about shaping access to jobs, to schools, housing, even who gets invited to the metaphoric table.
And the kicker, these definitions shift based on political convenience. Need to pit groups against each other? Change the categories. Want to dilute solidarity among marginalized groups? Shift the narrative again. It's like a game of Monopoly, but the rules are rigged.
And the players don't even know all the rules, which is the point. By constantly redefining race, the system keeps everyone guessing while maintaining the same hierarchies. It's the ultimate power move. Let's get deeper into Harris Combs' body out of place concept. It's about how marginalized people, especially Black and brown folks, are seen as intruders in spaces white society claims for itself. Basically, it's like white society saying, "Oh, you thought you could sit with us? Cute, but no."
Valerie Castile nailed it when she said her son Philando was black in the wrong time and place. It's a perfect summary of how society treats black bodies, as if your existence alone can somehow be a crime.
And Harris Combs connects this to history, like Jack Johnson, the first Black heavyweight boxing champion. He didn't just win, he had white America in a full on meltdown. Imagine being so good at something that people literally riot because they can't handle you. Jack said, "I'm winning," and they said, "Call the police."
Exactly. And then they tried to rewrite the whole thing. Combs points out how public lynchings became the twisted sequel to Johnson's wins, as if society needed to remind him, don't get too comfortable. It's the original version of stay in your lane, but with ropes instead of subtweets.
That's what Dorothy Roberts tackles in Fatal Invention. She writes, "Race has been manufactured to serve political ends, and boy has it ever. It's like the government runs on gaslighting. Oh, you're oppressed? That's not race, that's just circumstance." Sure, Jan.
And Kamala faced her own version of this. As a multiracial woman, she was navigating spaces that screamed, "You don't belong here," while also dealing with communities asking, "But are you really one of us?" It's intersectionality in action, or as I like to call it, y'all, interstressionality.
And let's not forget the Olympic level scrutiny she faced. Every word, every move, it was like she was auditioning for a role she already had. Meanwhile, you have folks like Trump out here yelling nonsense, and people were like, well, he's just being honest. Honest? That man couldn't recognize honesty if it's walked up to him wearing a MAGA hat.
Seriously, Roberts makes it clear. Women of color in power aren't just judged more harshly, they're judged for simply existing in spaces they're told they shouldn't occupy. And Kamala, she wasn't just breaking barriers, she was carrying everyone's expectations on her back while dodging all the nonsense.
So here's the real tea. Did Kamala's campaign push past these ridiculous standards, or did the system's biases keep her boxed in? And honestly, what does that mean for the future of politics for women of color? Like, are we ever going to see a day where a woman of color can just exist in power without it being a whole thing?
Wow, that was a lot, but necessary. This is Let's Talk About Race Election Edition after all, so we do not do surface level around here.
We've covered everything from Kamala's campaign to symbolic ethnicity to why the census loves to keep us guessing. Now it's your turn.
What do you think? Did Kamala effectively challenge colorblind narratives, or did her messaging fall short? And what does this tell us about race and politics moving forward?
Hit us up in the comments or on social media, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Let's keep this conversation alive.
Until next time, stay tuned, stay informed, and stay active.
And don't forget to call out the nonsense when you see and hear it. Bye, y'all.